I learned a long time ago that silence can be louder than shouting. But I didn't fully understand that truth until the morning I was fired by the CEO's son in a room full of people who suddenly forgot how to breathe. The boardroom smelled like polished wood and expensive coffee, floor-to-ceiling windows, a city skyline that always made people feel important. I had sat at that table for 9 years. 9 years of late nights, delayed vacations, missed birthdays. I knew every crack in the leather chairs. I knew which board member tapped his pen when he was nervous. I knew who pretended to read reports and who actually did. And I knew, the moment I walked in that day, something was wrong. No one looked at me directly. They looked past me, over me, like I had already become a memory. Then he walked in. Andrew, the CEO's son. Perfect haircut, perfect suit, tie adjusted just a little too often, like a boy playing dress-up in his father's power. He smiled as if today was a celebration, as if this was something he'd been waiting to do. He didn't sit right away. He stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the chair, and cleared his throat. The room went quiet in that uncomfortable way where people stop shifting in their seats because they don't want to draw attention to themselves. "Let's keep this brief," he said. Brief. That word should have warned me. He straightened his tie, looked around the table, and then locked his eyes on me. Not with anger, not with doubt, with satisfaction. "Daniel," he said carefully, "you're no longer with the company, effective immediately." There it was. No build-up, no explanation, no courtesy of pretending this was difficult. A few people clapped, not because they wanted to, because they didn't know what else to do. Their hands came together once, twice, then stopped, as if they suddenly realized how wrong it felt. I could feel every eye on me now, waiting, watching, expecting something. Anger, begging, shock. I gave them none of it. I smiled. Not a big smile, just enough to confuse them. "Thank you," I said. Andrew blinked, just once. He hadn't practiced that reaction in the mirror. I stood up slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't grab my laptop. I didn't collect my notes. I simply nodded at the table, turned, and walked out. Behind me, I felt the tension crack open like ice. In the hallway, my reflection stared back at me from the glass walls. Calm face, steady eyes, no visible damage. But inside, something was tightening. Not fear, not panic, focus. Because here's what Andrew didn't know, what no one in that room realized in their rush to get rid of me. They hadn't removed the most dangerous thing I held. That evening, HR sent the email. Short, cold, no reason given, no signatures, no mention of authority transfer, access revocation, or transition planning. Sloppy, almost insulting. I read it 3 times. Then I saved it, and I replied with one sentence. "Please provide the official transition documents." That was it. No emotion, no accusation, just a question. There was no response. Time started ticking the moment they stayed silent. Because my role wasn't ceremonial, I wasn't a figurehead. I was the gatekeeper to decisions that never made it into board minutes, compliance calls that saved millions quietly, deals I blocked that would have looked profitable until regulators started asking questions. Questions I knew how to answer. Questions no one else even knew existed. The next morning, my phone started ringing. Unknown numbers, law firms. "Just a formality," they said. "Let's clean things up," they said. Polite voices, tight schedules. They wanted signatures, quiet ones. I refused. Not loudly, not dramatically. I simply said, "I'm no longer employed. I'm not responsible." That's when the tone shifted. Urgency crept in. Voices became clipped. Emails became longer. And somewhere deep inside the company, a realization began spreading. They had pushed me out without closing the door behind me. Have you ever watched someone smile confidently while standing on thin ice, completely unaware of the cracks forming beneath their feet? That was Andrew. And as I sat at home that night, city lights blinking outside my window, I asked myself a simple question. If you were in my shoes, would you rush back to save them? Or would you let time do what it always does? That night, sleep never came. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind had started opening doors I had kept shut for years. When you live inside a system long enough, you don't just learn the rules, you learn where they bend. You learn which phone call causes panic, which email triggers emergency meetings, and which silence screams the loudest. At exactly 6:12 a.m., my eyes opened. My phone was on silent, but I already knew. Today, it would ring. While the coffee brewed, I stood by the window and looked down at the city. Same streets, same buildings, but something had shifted. It felt like a countdown had started, invisible but relentless. At 7:03 a.m., the first message arrived. Legal department. Carefully worded, almost gentle. We just want to ensure a smooth transition. I smiled. Smooth. They had walked me out of a boardroom without paperwork, without explanation, and now they wanted smooth? I didn't reply. At 9:15 a.m., the phone rang again, this time a senior legal partner. His voice carried urgency, wrapped in politeness. Daniel, we don't want any misunderstandings. Misunderstandings happen when information is missing. Here, nothing was missing, only honesty. I stayed silent. By midday, the messages started coming in from inside the company. Former colleagues, some nervous, some angry, some just confused. Files aren't moving without your sign-off. Compliance is asking questions we can't answer. One of the deals is frozen. Each message confirmed what I already knew. I had gone quiet at exactly the right moment. Because the truth was simple and dangerous. There were approvals only I held, clearances that made things legal, processes that existed only because I knew how to keep them compliant. And the most reckless mistake of all? None of it had been officially transferred. At 2:40 p.m., HR finally responded. An attachment followed, a draft agreement, 20 pages, PDF. I opened it slowly. Page 1, page 2, page 3. Every page said the same thing, dressed in different words. Responsibility stayed with me, authority shifted to them. I laughed, quietly, alone. They wanted my power gone without admitting they had removed me improperly. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you sign just to keep the peace, or would you wait until peace collapsed under its own weight? I closed the document, typed a single sentence. I question the legal validity of this document. Nothing else. Then came the silence, and after that, movement. By evening, inquiries had been sent. Regulators were asking for clarification. Internal audit had been alerted. No announcements, no headlines, just questions. And questions are far more dangerous than accusations. Inside the company, Andrew was holding meeting after meeting, projecting confidence, smiling, repeating phrases he'd memorized. But those who knew him well noticed the cracks. He kept reaching for water, flipping through papers too fast, looking to others when questions got specific. Because some questions didn't have answers he knew. At 10:07 p.m., my phone lit up with a name I hadn't expected so soon. The CEO. I didn't answer. Sometimes not responding is the clearest response of all. I stepped onto the balcony. The air was cold. The city breathed below me, unaware of the pressure building inside glass towers and closed offices. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel happy. Just steady. Because this revenge wasn't going to be loud. It wouldn't involve threats or confrontations. It would happen through policies, through clauses, through time.
and time, finally, was on my side.
The third day was when fear stopped pretending it didn't exist. Up until then, everything had been controlled. Polite emails, carefully chosen words, delays disguised as process. But on the third morning, I woke up to something different. Not a message, not a call. Silence. The dangerous kind. Silence means people are no longer coordinating. It means plans are failing behind closed doors. It means someone, somewhere, has realized the problem is bigger than they first admitted. I knew that silence well. I had used it myself years earlier when a partner tried to rush a deal that would have collapsed under regulatory scrutiny. Back then, I had gone quiet. 2 weeks later, the deal died on its own. This felt the same. At 8:20 a.m., a former colleague finally broke it. "Are you watching what's happening?" That was all the message said. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat at my desk and opened an old notebook. Not digital, paper, the kind people underestimate. Inside were timelines, names, decision paths. Every time I had stopped something quietly, I had written it down. Not out of paranoia, out of habit. I flipped to a page marked with a small black dot. A joint venture, overseas, high returns, low transparency. Andrew had pushed hard for it. I had blocked it harder. At the time, the CEO had trusted me. He'd told me, if you say no, it's no. Now that trust was gone, and with it, the memory of why I'd said no in the first place. At 9:47 a.m., the first internal memo leaked. Not publicly, internally. Pending review due to incomplete authorization. That phrase spread like a virus. Incomplete authorization meant no one could move forward, no one could sign, no one could claim responsibility without also inheriting risk. And risk is something executives avoid like fire. By noon, my phone started lighting up again. Not from legal, not from HR, from people I hadn't heard from in years. "Did you really have final control over that?" They're asking questions about approvals from last year. Compliance wants context. Context was the word they kept using, because context is what turns paperwork into truth, and I was the context. Around 1:30 p.m., I finally opened my email. 47 unread messages, none of them aggressive, none of them threatening. That's how I knew they were scared. When power is confident, it doesn't beg, it commands. These emails were requests, carefully phrased, almost respectful. "We'd appreciate your insight. Can you clarify a few things? This is purely informational." Purely informational is what people say when they're afraid of what the information might reveal. I replied to one message, only one. "I'm no longer authorized to provide guidance." That was true, and it was devastating. Because without guidance, processes stall. Without guidance, people guess. And when people guess in regulated environments, mistakes surface fast. At 3 p.m., I got the call I'd been expecting, but not yet. Andrew. His voice was different this time, lower, tighter. The confidence had been replaced with effort. "Daniel," he said, "we need to talk." Need, not want. I let the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. "About what?" I asked. "There are complications," he said. "Things you handled before." Handled, past tense, like it was all neatly wrapped up. "Those things still exist, whether I'm there or not." He paused. I could hear papers shifting, someone whispering in the background. "If you help us clear this up, we can make this right." Make this right. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an offer. I looked at the window in front of me. My reflection stared back, calm, detached. "What does right look like to you?" I asked. Another pause. "Closure," he said. Closure is a word people use when they want an ending without consequences. "I already have closure,"
I said. "You fired me." The call ended shortly after that. Not angrily, just abruptly. That's when I knew the situation had moved beyond Andrew. Because 30 minutes later, an email arrived from an external regulatory body. Not addressed to me directly, but copied. Request for historical clarification. They weren't asking questions yet. They were preparing to. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. This was the point of no return. Not because I had done anything, but because I had refused to fix what I didn't break. Have you ever noticed how systems don't collapse when attacked? They collapse when the person holding them together steps away. As evening settled in, I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth catching up to convenience. And once that starts, it doesn't stop.
By the fourth day, the company stopped pretending everything was under control. The tone changed everywhere. Emails lost their polish, meetings multiplied. People who had never cared about process suddenly became obsessed with it. When that happens, it's because someone has realized the rules are no longer protecting them. That morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from unknown numbers. I didn't return them. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and reviewed the timeline in my head. Not emotionally, logically, like I used to do before high-risk decisions. This was no longer about me being fired. This was about exposure. At 9:10 a.m., an internal notice leaked to the press. Not intentionally. That's how these things always happen. A document forwarded once too often. A journalist who knew which question to ask. Company faces regulatory delays amid internal authorization concerns. Careful wording, but devastating. Markets don't react to facts. They react to uncertainty. By noon, the stock had dipped just enough to be noticed. Not a crash, not yet, but enough to put pressure on the executive floor. That's when people start looking for a release valve. And they looked at me. My former assistant emailed first. Short, personal. They're scrambling. No one knows who owns what anymore. That sentence said everything. Ownership is power, and power without clarity becomes fear. Around 1:45 p.m., legal tried again. This time, they didn't ask me to sign anything. They asked me to advise. Off the record, they said, just to help stabilize things. I replied with one line. I can't advise on matters I no longer oversee. Still true, still devastating. Because advising means taking responsibility, and responsibility was the one thing they didn't want attached to my name anymore, until they needed it back. At 3:20 p.m., a second regulator sent a notice. Different agency, different language, same concern. Historical decisions, authorization chains, compliance oversight. These weren't surface-level issues. These were foundational. Once regulators start comparing notes, time compresses. What might have taken years now takes weeks, sometimes days. Inside the company, Andrew was unraveling. I heard it from 2 different sources, one in finance, one in operations. He had started snapping at people, interrupting presentations, demanding answers that didn't exist. Because answers require understanding, and understanding requires experience. You can inherit a title, you can't inherit judgment. Late afternoon, my phone rang again. The CEO. This time, I answered. His voice was older than I remembered. Not weaker, just tired. We made a mistake, he said. Not I. We. That distinction mattered. I know, I replied. A long pause followed. Not awkward, heavy. We need your help, he said. There it was, finally. No legal framing, no strategic language, just need. I stood and walked to the window. Traffic moved below, unaware of boardroom panic and compliance failures. I can't help quietly, I said, and I won't help without clarity. What do you want? He asked. The simplest question, the hardest one. I want the truth documented.
about my termination, about decision authority, about why certain deals were blocked. Silence. That silence told me everything. Because truth isn't dangerous when it's on your side. It's dangerous when it isn't. "We'll discuss internally," he finally said. "I'm sure you will," I replied. The call ended. That evening, news broke again. Another article, more speculation. Analysts asking why a company so confident months ago now seemed unsure of its own governance. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel relief. I felt gravity. Because once momentum shifts, it doesn't ask who deserves what. It just moves forward. And as night settled in, one thing became clear. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a collapse in slow motion, and no one could stop it now.
By the fifth day, the tension had reached a level where even the walls seemed to be holding their breath. I could feel it from miles away. Not because I was anywhere near the office, but because chaos radiates like a current. People whisper, processes stall, decisions hang in limbo, and the air itself feels heavy. Andrew's confidence was gone. Not completely, but enough that it flickered like a candle in a wind tunnel. People noticed. Staff who had once laughed at my obsessive compliance habits were suddenly following every tiny detail with nervous eyes. Emails I had once ignored now mattered. Approvals I had once provided without fanfare were suddenly unreachable, and in that void of knowledge, mistakes started appearing. Small at first, misfiled documents, forgotten deadlines, but each one carried weight. In a highly regulated environment, weight is punishment waiting to happen. I spent the morning reviewing the news feeds, internal leaks, and regulatory bulletins. Every new headline, every whisper in the market confirmed what I already suspected. The system was unraveling. And it was unraveling not because of me, but because I had refused to do the work I hadn't caused. I hadn't sabotaged. I had simply stepped aside and let reality catch up. Around midday, I got a call from one of the board members, a person who had always been distant, almost invisible to me until now. His voice was cautious, almost trembling. "Daniel, we need you to step in, even briefly, just to fix..." "Fix what?" I interrupted, calmly, almost lethargically. "Everything," he whispered, like saying the word aloud might break the line. I smiled quietly, not in triumph, just in acknowledgement of the power of inertia. "You mean clean up the chaos?" I asked. "Yes," he said. Silence followed. "You're the only one who understands the full chain." "Exactly," I replied, "and that's why I won't be doing it." Silence again, then a soft click. The line hung up. I let it ring. Later that afternoon, a client I had personally nurtured for years called. Normally, this would have been an ordinary call, but now the tone was urgent, the words carefully chosen. "Daniel, we're reviewing all contracts. Some of the deals you oversaw are now in question. Compliance flagged issues. Can you help us clarify?" I paused, thought about all the late nights, all the work that had gone unnoticed, all the approvals no one else could provide. "No," I said finally. "I'm no longer responsible for these deals. I didn't create the issues. I won't fix them." Click. It was quiet after that. Too quiet. And then came the domino effect. Internal audits intensified. Emails leaked. Departments argued over who had authority to sign what. External regulators began requesting documents I knew existed but were inaccessible to anyone else. The stakes became visible not in numbers on a balance sheet, but in trembling hands, whispered meetings, and hurried apologies. By evening, Andrew's calls came non-stop. This time he was frantic, pleading, not demanding. Every sentence was coated with tension. "Daniel, please, just guide us. Just tell me what to do." "Guidance comes with responsibility," I reminded him, "and I am not responsible. Not anymore." I could hear him swallow, the weight of all those years of misplaced confidence and inherited authority pressing down. His carefully rehearsed charm and poise had collapsed into desperation. At 9:15 p.m., the CEO himself called. His voice, once confident and commanding, sounded exhausted. "Daniel, we need your help. Things are slipping.
People are panicking. We can't manage this. I looked out the window at the city lights, reflections in the glass like tiny stars scattered across the asphalt. I let the pause linger, stretching time just enough to remind him that I held the leverage. "No," I said softly. A long silence. Finally, he said, "We'll handle it." And I knew. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I sought satisfaction, but because I had given them a choice, and they had failed to manage the consequences themselves. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply sat back, aware that the real victory was never about doing something spectacular. It was in refusing to do what wasn't mine to fix. The system was cracking. The people in it were exposed, and all I had done was step aside. The most devastating revenge, I realized, is never loud. It doesn't shout. It whispers through inaction, letting truth and consequence unfold at their own relentless pace. By the time the city slept, I understood the lesson clearly. Power isn't in taking action against someone. Sometimes the greatest power lies in restraint, and letting the chaos you didn't create speak for itself.
By the sixth day, the boardroom had become a battlefield, quiet, tense, and invisible. The chaos I had left untouched was no longer abstract. It had taken shape. Approvals were missing, deals were frozen, compliance gaps were exposed. Andrew and his team were scrambling, but the more they moved, the deeper they sank. Every misstep amplified the truth they had tried to hide. That morning, I received a detailed report from a regulator. Not a warning, not an accusation, yet, just a list of discrepancies, missing documents, and unverified approvals. It was subtle, almost clinical, but for those in power, subtlety is the most lethal form of pressure. I read it slowly, almost meditatively. Each line reminded me that I had created nothing but left the door open, and now reality was stepping in where I refused to act. Around 10:30 a.m., Andrew called again. His voice had shifted completely, urgent, pleading, hollowed. He knew the walls were closing in. "Daniel, we need a meeting," he said. "Please, just an hour. Help us sort this." I leaned back in my chair. The city outside my window blinked back at me, indifferent. I didn't move to respond. I let silence stretch, just long enough to make the weight of my refusal tangible. "Daniel?" he asked. His confidence cracked. "Not today," I said calmly. Click. That afternoon, the consequences multiplied. Deals I had once blocked for good reason were being re-examined. Regulatory inquiries were intensifying. Internal audits revealed gaps that had been invisible until now. Board members were scrambling for explanations. Managers whispered about what Daniel knew and why he left. I watched from a distance, detached but observant. Every move they made confirmed the power I had carried quietly, invisibly, for years. By evening, the CEO called. This time, there was no pretense, no corporate phrasing, no careful wording, just need. "Daniel," he said, voice heavy, "we misjudged the situation. We need your help to stabilize this." I paused, not out of hesitation, but out of clarity. "I cannot," I said simply. Silence. "Please," he whispered. "I've already given what I can. I won't fix what you broke by neglect and arrogance." The call ended, and a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't gloating. It was the quiet satisfaction of integrity left intact. I had been pushed out, humiliated in front of peers, yet the power I refused to surrender became the leverage that no one else understood. Over the next few days, news outlets reported internal turmoil at the company. Investors noticed delays, audits flagged inconsistencies, and Andrew's reputation, carefully built on inherited authority, began to crack.
The CEO, once confident and commanding, was forced to confront the reality that leadership isn't transferable like a title. It's earned, maintained, and protected through accountability. The real revenge wasn't in anger. It wasn't in retaliation. It was in what I refused to do. I didn't sabotage, I didn't leak secrets, I didn't attack anyone. I simply stepped aside and let the systems, decisions, and responsibilities I had safeguarded for years reveal the consequences of neglect and incompetence. That week, I reflected on the lessons hidden within the chaos. Power is not always in action. Sometimes restraint, patience, and refusal carry more weight than the loudest confrontation. Reputation, integrity, and authority cannot be taken lightly. And most importantly, when people underestimate what you protect silently, the consequences of their arrogance can become your quiet revenge. As I stood by the window that final evening, city lights stretching like veins across the asphalt, I realized that the story wasn't about victory over Andrew or over the company. It was about truth, accountability, and the subtle, devastating impact of refusing to correct a mess that isn't yours. Because the most powerful revenge is not what you do to someone, it's what you choose not to do, letting reality itself carry the weight of justice. And in that silence, watching the chaos unfold, I finally smiled.